Welcome to Let's Commentary Venusian Vengeance. I'm Alex Stamos, creator of Venusian Vengeance, Ninja the Explorer, and the Tales of the Renegade Sector series. I wanted to make this series of videos to play through the game and discuss the various design choices I made. Alright, let's begin. So I want to start by talking about a little of the backstory of how I came to be making Venusian Vengeance. I originally planned the game between seasons of Tales of the Renegade Sector, and it was originally meant to be a game that switched between run-and-gun segments and sort of Zelda dungeon type segments where you go through the various outposts and laboratories on Venus. The game was inspired a lot by both by 80s action movies, but also by Cold War era science fiction, particularly Soviet science fiction, where Venus was depicted as this very lush and overgrown planet filled with forests and swamps and oftentimes dinosaurs. And so I wanted to make this sort of over the top action game that existed in that Venus from 50s science fiction. And so, of course, I had to get Sergeant John Dagger from Cold Vengeance in on the action, since it seemed like a perfect fit for him, fighting communists on Venus. So I made this, so I came up with the title Venusian Vengeance as a tie-in to Cold Vengeance. And I put the idea to the side for a while to work on other things, but eventually I happened to be browsing on the TIG source forums, and I saw a portfolio for an artist that I liked his style quite a bit, so I approached him about working on something, and he said, "Sure, what do you have in mind?" So I first proposed working on a sort of large-scale barbarian fantasy action-adventure game, which we both decided was a bit too much, too long of a project for our first collaboration. So I brought up Venusian Vengeance, which at the time I thought would take maybe a month, 2 months to make. The idea ended up growing and morphing. We dropped the Zelda-like sections and focused on the run-and-gun sections, and eventually it ended up taking quite a bit longer to make. The artist, Saran Cernak, ended up slowing down and eventually stopping work on the game. He had to drop out, but fortunately let me use the art assets he had made so far, such as the player sprite here, the HUD, and also some of the enemies and color palettes. And thus you get the game you see today. So let me start talking about the level design. One of the things I very much tried to do is make sure each section of the game served a purpose in the overall game. And part of this was I would write down my outlines for each level to make sure that I could actually describe each section in maybe just a sentence or two, but describe why this section was there. So, for example, that section that we just played is introducing the soldier enemy, the first enemy you run into. It's the basic enemy of the game. And also introduce the explosive barrels, which make it easier to kill those soldier enemies and more efficient to kill them. And also, as you see there, it destroys the pillars, so it introduces that there are some of the objects in the game are destructible. So this next section sort of continues on the soldiers and puts them in a variety of environments. It's a scrolling section, so you can go through, go around objects in different ways, and fight through the enemies to basically continue to familiarize the player with the basic enemy type before introducing the second enemy, which is the Tackler. Now this is another one of the sprites that Saran Cernak did before he left the project, and he actually came up with a lot of the design for that enemy on how it would act, that it would knock down pillars, which is actually how we decided to have destructible objects in the game in the first place, so that the tacklers would seem big and strong and able to knock down solid objects. So now that I've introduced the tacklers and introduced the soldiers, I have them both at the same time, followed by a scrolling area where you have both soldiers and tacklers. Next, I introduced the first alien enemy of the game. I wanted... there's more alien enemies later on in the game once you get into the jungle areas, but I wanted to introduce at least one alien early on just to set up that there are in fact native life forms on Venus, and also to have a basic swarming fodder enemy. And now we come to our first boss battle. This was actually originally the standard soldier sprite, but I decided when Rancernak left the project, I decided to reappropriate it as a boss battle, since I wanted to have a boss with a rocket launcher, and I felt the standard enemy would be better suited to have a weapon that just looked like a standard gun. So again, destructible environment comes into play here. You have the pillars, which serve as cover, but you also might want to destroy a few of them to get a better shot on the boss. And here you see that I wanted to have the weapon system in the game where when you defeat a boss, you can get his weapon and then use it, which is one of the reasons a good deal of the boss battles in the game actually occur in the middle of levels rather than at the end of levels. The reason for this being, I wanted to have these sections after boss battles that drop weapons where you can then play around with the weapon. And so here I have this section with a lot of pillars that can be destroyed by the rocket launcher, and also a lot of tacklers that are easier to defeat with the rocket launcher than they are with the standard gun. So you have a chance to feel powerful and rampage through enemies right after defeating the boss battle. So after that, I introduce the next challenge, which is one of the harder ones early on in the game, which are these lava pillars, which shoot out these little explosive balls of lava. And of course, after I've introduced that, I fold them back into the rest of the game with the previous enemies, which now are spawning from off screen and coming to attack you, while you also have to dodge the balls of death, which I just failed to do. Alright, let's see if I can beat this bit while also talking. Or not talking, as the case may be. I need to focus on this section. But the idea that I wanted to have is that the game builds up to these moments of chaos where all the various elements that you're already familiar with combine in new ways and provide chaos that can still be parsed by the player as combinations of objects they're familiar with, so that they aren't completely overwhelmed, but they still have a lot to deal with. So it's sort of manageable chaos. Which brings us to the end of level 1 and the end of the first video. This has been Alex Stamos, and I'll continue it with video 2 on level 2. Thank you.